really what's happening is this has become a very complicated interaction between the end user and the journey that they're trying to take and the marketer and the journey that they want you to take.
This is Velocitize Talks, and I'm Eric Jones. I'm here with Jeff Walpole, who is the co-founder and CEO of Phase2 Technologies. Jeff, great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about Phase2 and what makes you special.
Phase 2 is, I like to say, it's an overnight success, 20 years in the making. So we started in 2001 as a small development shop, and we've grown into a much larger digital agency focused on really the customer experience in its broadest sense. So we like to think of it as one part analytics and understanding the customer and the problems that they're trying to solve. One part creative thinking and bringing new ideas to the table to try to reinvigorate the thought process. And then a third part is like world-class execution. So amazing technology prowess and the ability to implement at a great scale.
So you mentioned customer experience. Tell us a little bit about how the customer journey has evolved the most in the last 2 years.
Yeah. The customer journey has been evolving quite a bit in digital experience. I mean, one of the really interesting things is on the front end, you have this sort of explosion of ways that the end user interacts with a digital application. So everything from voice and text and chat and Internet of Things now, really expanding beyond web and mobile. And that's just what the consumer expects. They expect to be able to interact with a digital brand or property in all of these different venues, whatever's convenient for them, whenever, however they want. Meanwhile, marketers have got a slew of new technology that they're using to help guide that process. So you've got journey orchestration, you've got marketing automation, you've got personalization, and of course CRM. And so really what's happening is this has become a very complicated interaction between the end user and the journey that they're trying to take and the marketer and the journey that they want you to take.
You mentioned personalization. That's long been the holy grail, right, for all marketers. What are some actionable strategies that you advise clients in taking that journey on personalization?
Right. So personalization is often talked about or thought about as a technology problem. And there certainly is plenty of technology out there trying to solve or capable of solving the personalization problem, which is delivering a unique piece of content or an experience or a call to action at the right moment, the right time for both the marketer and the end user. The trick is that really most customers, when they get down to implementing personalization, the problem isn't the lack of technology. The problem is that they don't understand exactly what their goals are. They don't have the right content to support it. And they usually don't understand the user, the end user, well enough to be able to guide them to that place that's truly personalized. So we'll often go in and find out that a customer has purchased or owns or partially implemented some personalization technology, but they haven't been able to pull it through and make it successful because they haven't tied that data, that end user, and that content together to create the right experience.
So, you mentioned data and personalization. How are you beginning to balance the interests of privacy versus the data that's required for personalization? Whether it's following GDPR or CCPA or anything else for that matter.
Yeah, so this is a big issue for our customers. Right now, most of our customers are in the large to enterprise size. They would fall easily well within the bounds of both GDPR and CCPA. So GDPR is a sort of a first shot across the bow from privacy regulation perspective was fairly simple, right? It was I accept and acknowledge that I'm being tracked by cookies. CCPA takes it to a whole new level. It now says, hey, show me all the data that you have on me, and I may be prompted to either delete it or flag it for not selling or those types of things. And so what that requires that's different in the GDPR is it requires marketers and brands and really anybody who's going to be exposed to this to be able to reach into their own systems and produce on the fly all the content, or all the data rather, that they have on that individual customer. So it's a real game changer. It's a lot scarier to implement than GDPR, and there's a lot more that can go wrong for the marketer in that process if you don't have that data, or you're not able to produce it on the fly, or you're not able to actually take the action of flagging it to be deleted or not sold. And so for our customers, this is a real wake-up call. And while we haven't seen any real strong regulation yet, there's sort of a, July is the point in time in which the, Attorney General is saying that they will start actually, prosecuting cases and look at this stuff. And who knows how long it will take before something really happens. But the reality is that everybody needs to be ready now. So we're seeing a real scramble to get the customer data problem solved in advance of being ready for that regulation.
You mentioned cookies, and cookies are, not long for this world. How do you think marketers are going to cope in a cookieless world?
Well, I think marketers are already having to cope and work around these things. So like I said, with GDPR and CCPA, marketers are blazing new trails, because what's happening is it's not just about like cookies, this front-end technology, this thing that's ahead of you on the browser. It's now the ability for that end user to say, hey, I need to actually know what you're tracking about me and what you know about me. And so that's the real danger. And I think if they can get around that, then the lack of cookies is easy. Now, the bigger problem for me is we talked about personalization. I think personalization requires, to some extent, an acknowledgement of whether someone has or hasn't trafficked on that site already, right? Mm-hmm. And so to some extent, cookies are the most basic way of doing that. But certainly there will need to be a whole slew of new technologies that are focused on being able to actually track the behavior of a user as they come to a site and as they move around that site.
You work with, you mentioned big enterprise clients. What's some advice that you typically give these accounts to get the most out of their digital experience platform?
It's always a big question. Now, one of the problems that we see for most of the bigger enterprise organizations is that you want to advise them that they need to be thinking beyond websites, right? They need to be thinking about the complete digital experience, whether it's on voice or text or wherever their end customers want to have it. And you acknowledge and you understand that it's more than just a content management system and a website. You've got commerce, you've got CRM, you've got MarTech. And so there's this huge stack of technology that's required to make a very good digital experience in this day and age. The problem is that, like most enterprise organizations, they've inherited technology. They've bought companies. They have legacy pieces of technology that are in place. And so you're never really able to give them a clean playing field. You can't say, hey, here's the best of breed of all these different things that we should integrate for you. You're always working around something that's been in place for a while. And so the trick for most large enterprises is figuring out what to swap out, when, and in what order, and then how to reintegrate the whole experience. So in a way, it's always changing, right? There's really never one stack of technology delivering that experience. It's always something in the sort of half legacy, half integrated, and half brand new state.
So tell us a little bit about how Headless plays in that world and helps these clients avoid the need to re-platform, keep some of their legacy infrastructure and adopt some of these newer technologies.
Yeah, Headless is really, it is probably one of the most important trends right now, in part because the technology on the front end, specifically JavaScript technologies, have become so powerful and so popular that developers are able to craft this experience on the front end that's completely independent of what's going on behind it, either at the content management system or commerce or whatever, right? And so what you're seeing is you really are seeing a true decoupling, right? And decoupling in that sense means the ability to swap out pieces of that architecture independent of each other. So we actually have clients who have hired us to swap out the whole back end, and the end user really sees no change at all. Mm-hmm. They keep the same exact front-end JavaScript templates and things in place, and we've had clients hire us to do the exact opposite. And so it is actually kind of a game changer in that you're able to independently swap out pieces of the stack in that architecture without necessarily redoing the whole thing.
Right. So within that stack, who do you see as being, typically the winners and losers, the technologies that are increasingly being deployed versus some of the ones that aren't being used as frequently?
Yeah, so in terms of technologies, like I said, on the front end, React Native is incredibly popular as a JavaScript framework. It's very powerful. It allows developers to create an experience that's essentially the same on the web as it is then portable to iOS or mobile app essentially. So it's very popular from that perspective, and it's the clear winner from at least from what I've seen in the clients that we work with.
Yeah, we've seen those the sort of scapes, right? The architectures.
Yeah.
It's just growing more and more every single year. It's incredible. You talked about the website. What do you think the website looks like in 5 years?
Well, that's a really great question. I mean, I think websites are a necessary component of every digital experience, and I think they're going to continue to be an important part of it. Hopefully, they are becoming smarter. They're becoming, for instance, responsive. Right? If you look back a couple of years ago, responsive was something you actually had to force into a a web project, right? Whereas today we look at it and we say, well, of course it's going to be responsive. Why would you build a non-responsive website? So these things do evolve. What starts out as a cutting edge becomes part of the expected stack in the future. This whole thing becomes a seamless experience, right? The goal being what we call omnichannel, right? Which is it doesn't matter if I'm on the website or I'm on Alexa or I'm on your app. I should have the same experience, or at least the same relative kind of experience with your brand in all these places, if you want me to think of you as a brand that cares about the user experience. And so for me, it's not that websites will be a ton different. It's that they'll be one piece of a much larger ecosystem that's fully integrated.
So I'm really curious on the omni-channel front. Are there brands that you think do that extremely well today?
Yeah, this is always an interesting question. Omnichannel has been lagging for so long. I mean, you certainly see it in some retailers, people like Nike. One brand that gets mentioned a lot is Domino's Pizza, right? So Domino's Pizza has a very omni-channel-like experience. Ironically, they have a terrible accessibility experience. So I don't even like to mention them because they're one of the people that are failing on that side. But I do think that there are brands that are out there, particularly B2C, because B2C has a much bigger problem. They're dealing with an infinite population of potential customers. And so for them, making that experience seamless makes a lot of sense. For government or nonprofits or B2Bs or media companies, it's a little bit harder value proposition to sell it through. And so I think they're a little bit farther behind on the tech. I hear people ask me this question all the time. It's like, how come when I go on Spotify and I change from my house to my car, it picks up right where I did, and yet when I'm on a website, it just never really knows who I am. And that is a omni-channel experience, and they're delivering it. But it's Spotify, right? So
right. Jeff, one of the questions we love asking our guests is a book or podcast that you'd like to recommend to our viewers.
Yeah. So for people who are running agencies, I think there's a great book that I'm reading right now by Blair Ains, who it's called The Win Without Pitch Manifesto, I believe. And it's all about the idea of creating this right dynamic with your clients, sort of the power and the struggle for control over the project and the creative and the deliverables. It all comes from this perspective that he has in this book, which is wonderful. It's complemented by a great podcast. So if you're interested, I think it's sort of easier to dip a toe in the podcast, which is called Two Bobs. And it's Blair Ains and David C. Baker. And they talk about agency woes across the board. And I love this. My colleagues love it. I've sent it to competitors and said, you got to listen to this. It's fantastic. So that's one I really like. And it's, again, complemented by the book. I also, there's a book I read last year that I haven't been able to get enough of, which is called The Culture Code. And it's all about creating a great culture. Applies great to digital or non-digital. But the author makes a lot of references to different groups that have created tight-knit cultures off of the same formula. And it's fascinating. And it really does hold true for anyone who's running an organization that's trying to create a great culture and a great employee experience. I just keep going back to it and saying, yeah, it's right in there. It's right in there. So that's when I highly recommend to anyone who's running a business or is in like a employee experience type position.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
That was Jeff Walpole, the co-founder and CEO of Phase2 Technologies.